Well, hello, everyone. It's been a long time. My bud, Jeremy Crawford, the producer and co-host. I'm Wally Felt on Did You Know Southwestern Montana, and I'm thinking 6-7 months since we've done one of our history.
Yeah, it's been a little while.
We've concentrated on the sports figures and stars of Southwestern Montana this first 6 months of the year, or however way it worked out. But we decided it's time to open up the history books again, shake off a little bit of dust, and talk about things. And our first back subject, as we get back into things, is Thanksgiving. Thanksgiving just happened, and it's interesting when you go backwards and you look at Thanksgiving, and you kind of think, well, was Thanksgiving in the earlier days like it is now? Because, I mean, now, you get together with your family. There's a community dinner, which we'll talk about. There's different things going on. So how different could it be if we go back into the early days of Thanksgiving? But first, how about a little Thanksgiving history? Want a little Thanksgiving history?
Sure.
Okay, so first, when the first Thanksgiving in America was, take a guess.
1692.
You're off by 71 years.
Yep, 1621.
Yes. And it was a 3-day event, and they were celebrating their great harvest. Well, in the early days of the United States, Thanksgiving was celebrated at various times, usually in November, sometimes December. Now, our very first president, George Washington, was the first president to actually come close to making Thanksgiving an official holiday. He chose November 16th, 1789 as a national day of thanksgiving and prayer in gratitude for the end of the Revolutionary War and when we became a country. That sounds like a good plan to have Thanksgiving for that.
Yep.
And now, here's a name, and I'm going to ask you, if I told you, Jeremy, who is Sarah Josefina Hale, would you come up with an answer?
I'd have no clue.
Well, she's a lady in 1846 who began a 17-year letter writing campaign to convince American presidents that it was time to make the Thanksgiving holiday an official holiday. Like I said, 17 years. So at age 74, Hale's dream became reality in September of 1863. Her letter to both President Abraham Lincoln, but also one to Secretary of State William Seward, featured this impassioned plea. And it probably rang a little truer in 1863, right in the middle of America's Civil War. She said, "It needs national recognition and authoritative fixation, only to become permanently an American custom and institution." That was the line. Now, they say, if you go back and you dwell a little bit in that, the reason why it probably became a holiday, partly Lincoln, but mostly Seward.
Yeah.
He influenced Abraham Lincoln. He says, Mr. President, we need to do this. And so on October 3rd, 1863, President Lincoln proclaimed the last Thursday of November to be Thanksgiving Day. And I think it's going to be kind of interesting because we have a little controversy on when Thanksgiving is, but we're going to talk about that a little bit later in our program. The first proclamation, I found this purely by chance, okay? The first proclamation for Thanksgiving happened in 1868. Now, this is in Montana, 1868, and it was issued on November 9th, 1868. The closing paragraph of the proclamation read, "Now, therefore, I, James Tuft, acting governor of the territory of Montana, recommend that Thursday, November 26th, be set apart as a day of thanksgiving and prayer, and request the citizens throughout the territory to suitably observe the same." And that was based off a presidential proclamation of the same. And looking at this, there was every year for a long time, Thanksgiving, even though it was an official holiday, each president and each governor still had to issue an official proclamation telling everybody that it was Thanksgiving.
Yeah, and it seemed like it kind of, like it does in modern day, it depended on if it was a Republican or a Democrat and when they would issue it.
And we have an interesting story that we're going to get into in a little bit later on. Now, the November 30th, 1895 edition of the Madisonian, that's the paper over in Madison County, based out of Virginia City, noted that folks in Silver Star would dance on Thanksgiving Eve, while residents of Whitehall and Twin Bridges would dance on Thanksgiving in their annual Thanksgiving Ball. Now, let's flip over to Beaverhead County in Dillon. The December 6th edition of the Dillon Examiner reported that the annual Thanksgiving Ball was given in Darts Hall. And we've talked about Darts Hall before.
Yes.
And was one of the largest attended affairs in Dillon in recent years. Now, this is the killer line I like. The recently organized Dillon Orchestra supplied splendid music. Now, that's 1895. You actually found a little bit about how Thanksgiving was in Montana's first territorial capital, Bannock.
Yeah, so I had kind of found a couple things, actually. They're kind of opposing stories. One of the stories said that it was Montana's first official Thanksgiving holiday that they actually celebrated it.
That must have been 1868 then.
Yep, and actually, yeah, and is what it said was that good old Sheriff Henry Plummer.
Oh, Henry's back.
Paid $40 in gold. Some say $30, so there's a little bit of, like we know with
Inflation.
Plumber.
Inflation.
Yep, there's a little bit of stuff going on there, but it said goods were scarce, freight was slow arriving, and no one even thought about serving a turkey. Near neighbors invited Harriet and Wilbur, along with Henry Edgerton Sanders' uncle, to Thanksgiving dinner. This neighbor wanted to make a good impression on the family. Edgerton was newly appointed Chief Justice of the Supreme Court of Idaho Territory, because at that time we were still part of Idaho Territory, which then included President Day, Montana. Their host offered the invitation well in advance. He miraculously procured a turkey, an unheard of, unbelievable luxury, for $30 in gold dust. Again, that's where it kind of comes in. Some accounts say 30, some say 40. And paid a fortune to have it freighted all the way from Salt Lake City. So maybe it was $30 for the turkey and $10 to have it freighted.
And was the turkey live?
Probably was. Yep. Back then, most of the time, you'd get a live turkey and then you would butcher it. Harriet wrote later that their Thanksgiving meal was as fine and beautifully cooked as any meal she ever enjoyed in New York City's finest restaurants. Unfortunately, their host failed to make a good impression. In early January, just weeks later, Sanders and the vigilantes saw to the hanging of Sheriff Henry Plummer, the same man who hosted their Thanksgiving Day feast.
Wow.
So, I mean, even in Montana's early beginnings, their Thanksgiving had a little bit of
Controversy
there.
Well, and we'll jump ahead about 40 years now, 1902. 40 years, 35, something like that.
Yeah.
The annual Virginia City Thanksgiving Ball was hosted by the Fairweather Tent Number 12 Knights of the Maccabees. Have you ever heard of the Maccabees?
I've never heard of the Maccabees.
It was reported in the Madisonian that the floor was in splendid shape and the music was in good tune and time. Those are important things when you're two-stepping, I guess. Everything worked harmoniously, and the dancers were loth to depart for their homes, even though daylight was near at hand when the home waltz was played.
It's kind of funny because it seemed like the dances were a huge, huge part of that. And I even read in one paper where they said there were so many of them in Missoula that they were actually moving the dates to later in December, because nobody would have been, like, if people would have picked the ones they wanted to show up, they would have only had 2 or 3 people there because everybody was planning on having a Thanksgiving dance.
Well, and we're starting to see now, just 35, 40 years into Thanksgiving being an official holiday, although it's always been celebrated.
Yeah.
It just hasn't been official, that what you said, the dance is the main the main form of celebrating Thanksgiving.
And the original Thanksgiving kind of too is why they started celebrating was a way because they had a bounty of crops brought in, so that was their way of giving thanks for the year.
Yeah, and 3 days of it, that must have been one heck of a Thanksgiving dinner.
Quite the party.
Yes. Okay, in 1902, we're going to stay in 1902. There was a story in the November 28th edition of the Dillon Tribune describing the various Thanksgiving programs in the Dillon schools. Also in Dillon's other paper, the Dillon Examiner, in 1902. Now remember, there were two papers in those days. And that's another one we've already talked about because one was Republican-based and one was Democratic-influenced. But in the Dillon Examiner, there was an announcement of 2 basketball games to be played on Thanksgiving Day. Now, one thing I found interesting in those early days, in the early 1900s and stuff, as I'm showing you on my piece of paper, I spelled out basketball exactly like they did it in the paper. It's 2 words.
Yeah, I noticed a lot of things in the early days. The spelling in the papers were very, very interesting.
Yes. Well, and as I've already, I mean, you and I have both read quotes, and the language that was in the newspapers was also pretty flowery. Okay, so now the headline in that story about the schools said, "Our national holiday observed in the schools." The subheadline read, "Songs and recitations of Thanksgiving, original and interesting programs." So the opening program was, the opening paragraph of the story was highly complimentary. Now, once again, this is quoting exactly how it was written in the Dillon Tribune. "Rarely have the children of the public school given as interesting and complete programs as were given by the different grades Wednesday afternoon in the celebration of the National Day of Thanksgiving." And then it was interesting to note that when they had the programs published, reading the programs, some programs featured pilgrims.
Yes.
Some programs featured Puritans, and if you're any kind of historian from that time period, those were 2 entirely different people.
They were.
So, yeah, 2 different social circles. But, that's another program, but I'm not sure if we'd have to worry about that one. I don't know how many pilgrims or Puritans we had in southwestern Montana, but it's something to think about. Now, in that very same edition, and here's something else that we've talked about in the past, there was a dedication story of the new county high school building in that very same paper. So, once again, there's another story. In 1909, the Scenic Theater hosted a special Thanksgiving program featuring the showing of the World Championship Baseball. Once again, baseball is 2 words, not one, between Chicago and Detroit. And the program also included 2 other films and 2 illustrated songs. And I'm trying to figure out what an illustrated song is.
I wonder if that was kind of like an early version of a music video.
Maybe. Well, Edith Remley, and Remley's a name in Beaverhead County that's been around for a while, and Miss Carolyn Stoller were the singers. Now, here was the price. Admission was 5 cents and 10 cents. And it didn't say which was which, but I'm thinking 5 cents for children and 10 cents for adults. Now, in that same paper advertising the special holiday program, there was an Elio Brothers sale ad for a 20% off Thanksgiving sale. Now, that same edition. Now, here's I see something starting that was prevalent in Thanksgiving celebrations in Dillon and around the area. That same edition talked of the Baptist, Methodist, and Presbyterian churches uniting for a Thanksgiving service at the Presbyterian Church on Thanksgiving morning. The sermon would be delivered by Reverend F.E. Dodds of the Methodist Church. There would be appropriate music rendered, and all citizens were most cordially invited to attend.
The one thing I kind of thought was interesting that I had noticed starting in about the 1910, 1915s, is what they would advertise for Thanksgiving. The stores would advertise your Thanksgiving wares. They'd have vests and hats and things like that. And then you would see some of the bakeries offering pies just like Mom makes or better. And then the other big Thanksgiving advertisement was new cutlery. Show off all your guests, your cutlery's best.
Well, and I got one for you staying on that very same line. Dillon Dry Goods in the November 18th edition of the Dillon Tribune had a full-page ad offering sale prices for tablecloths, centerpieces, runners, doilies, and napkins in the latest styles and patterns for your Thanksgiving table.
And then the next part that I really liked, and this led up till about the 50s for Thanksgiving, was you would see like Lima News, and it'd be like such and such ate Thanksgiving dinner at so-and-so's house. And then like Mr. and Mrs. Smith's daughter was down from college to eat Thanksgiving dinner. So they literally reported in the paper who ate Thanksgiving dinner at whose house.
Well, and actually, like you said, that started in the early teens. And if you look at the even earlier papers, and they're hard to read because some of the online editions, I'm thinking the papers they scanned weren't in the best shape anyway. But that's how Thanksgiving was noted. And every once in a while, you would see something about that so and so would host Thanksgiving dinner for the single teachers, although they didn't say the single teachers, or they would host, or Rotary Club would host a Thanksgiving feast, and that wouldn't be on Thanksgiving, it would be like Wednesday before. But, so breaking bread was pretty much the optimum way to celebrate Thanksgiving.
Yeah, and it just, to me, I found it really interesting. It was almost like, we look at social media now and we think that people post too much on social media, but back then they were posting it in the paper. Well,
and I happened to jot one down in my notes. December 1st, 1920, the Dillon Examiner, there was in the front page, not like page 3 or 4, in the front page, there was a note that said, Miss King, Miss Snyder, and Miss Wymus spent Thanksgiving vacation at the Pile Ranch on the Upper Grasshopper. So there you have it in black and white. And we're going to take a break. We're going to push ourselves away from the table for just a second. We're going to take a break, and we'll be back to talk more Thanksgiving here on Did You Know, Southwestern Montana. Well, Jeremy, one of the big traditions in modern Beaverhead County and in Dillon is the St. Rose Catholic Church's annual Thanksgiving dinner, their community Thanksgiving dinner. And you did a little research on that.
Yeah, it started in 1996. And that was kind of the first one they did, and it started out kind of small. Early paper, it showed just a little dolly with a cinder block holding it up, and then a sign taped to it that said, "Free Thanksgiving dinner, come in with balloons." And, from there, it's just kind of grown to what we know today. I know last year, because of COVID, they didn't hold it. But they did still offer delivery, if I remember right.
I think they did that last year too, because when they were requesting volunteers, they were asking for people who wanted to volunteer to help deliver Thanksgiving dinner.
Yeah, and and the thing is it is held at the Catholic Church, but I do know that it's they have volunteers from all over Dillon, plus churches ask for their members if they want to cook potatoes or pies or something to donate to. So I know my mother-in-law, she brought 5 pounds of mashed potatoes over.
Wow. Good for her. Good for her. Well, no community dinner in 1928, but in an article in the Dillon Examiner, the Andrus Grill. Now, is the Andrus Grill, was it owned by the Andruses, or was it part of the Andrus Hotel?
I think it was part of the Andrus Hotel, and I think it's just kind of like the Andrus Bar, how they would rent out that space. So I know where Pioneer Furniture sits now and where the mattresses are, that was a restaurant at one time.
That possibly the Andrus Grill did.
That was the Andrus Grill.
Well, they offered a 5-course Thanksgiving dinner, whopping price of $1.50. And I didn't do the, the what would it be nowadays type of a deal, but it was a 5-course dinner, turkey, mashed potatoes, dressing. Oh, I'm sure there's gravy, and gravy probably did not count as one of the.
Yeah, it was probably part of it.
Yeah, and dessert and a veggie.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking, back in those days, I don't think they had green bean casserole.
Probably
so
not.
It was probably corn or canned beans. And, everybody had gardens then, so I imagine the veggies were all nice and fresh.
You think they had cranberries back then?
Oh, they better.
Yeah.
I mean, that's Thanksgiving. That's one of the reasons, of course, nowadays you can eat, cranberries year round.
Yeah.
Interesting. This is an interesting side note with cranberries. You know how one of the favorites of Thanksgiving and holiday is pumpkin pie.
Yeah.
Everybody wants pumpkin pie for Thanksgiving, and Jim out at Town and Country told me interesting little store story. He said for many years, pumpkin was only popular. The cans of pumpkin was only popular during the holidays.
Yeah.
The Christmas and Thanksgiving holidays. And they sometimes had to throw stuff away because the pumpkin wasn't used. As soon as Starbucks came up with their famous pumpkin latte, like 30 years ago or something like that, all of a sudden,
pumpkins and everything.
Yeah, it's a year-round treat now.
You can get pumpkin pancakes.
Oh. And not only at Thanksgiving, right?
Nope. Did you know that canned pumpkin's not really pumpkin?
What is it?
It is like a squash.
Oh, okay. I did not know that.
Yep.
Huh. Interesting. Okay, well, let's get back to the history book here. Yeah. So in the November 26, 1930 edition of the Dillon Tribune, they printed George Washington's 1789 Thanksgiving Proclamation on the paper's front page. Right below the proclamation was an announcement of Union Thanksgiving services at the Baptist Church. Now they have come up with a name for the group of churches getting together. So the 6 churches that took place in this were, and where did I I don't have them. I just had 6 churches here. Okay, so the 6 churches, now get this, here's charity taking care of one another. They said that all the offerings given for that special Thanksgiving service would be donated to Barrett Hospital. Nice touch. That was 1930. Now in 1940, now we get to talk controversy again. In 1940, Montana joined many other states in observing Thanksgiving a week earlier from the traditional last Thursday of November. It was announced on the front page of the November 24th, 1940 Dillon Tribune in a proclamation by Montana Governor Roy E. Ayers to confirm with President Franklin D. Roosevelt's presidential proclamation. Now, that proclamation first came in 1939 when November would have not 4 Thursdays, but 5. National business leaders were concerned that there wouldn't be enough time for people to Christmas shop. 1939, they were talking about Christmas shopping.
Yep.
Roosevelt listened and agreed to officially moving Thanksgiving to the 3rd Thursday of each November. But some states decided to stay to that last Thursday. They were in the minority then. Montana, one of the ones that went to the 3rd Thursday, but that 3rd Thursday Thanksgiving would only last 2 years. On December 26, 1941, Congress, they're the ones that have really more control than a lot of people really think they do, passed a law making the Thanksgiving the last Thursday of November. And you have some additional controversy to that little bit of history.
So, yeah, it was kind of funny. In Red Lodge, Montana, the mayor didn't want to, he wanted to remain neutral on the issue. So what he did is he's proclaimed there would be 2 Thanksgivings that year. And basically there would be one for the Republicans and one for the Democrats. So on November 23rd was the Democrats' Thursday. And November 30th was the Republicans' Thursday. So they basically celebrated 2 Thanksgivings that month.
So did the businesses in town close for both days, and did the schools close for both days?
You know, it's kind of interesting because I looked and I really couldn't find much about it. I think it was kind of more of just like a not wanting to rock the boat PR stunt. And he just proclaimed that there was going to be 2 Thanksgivings that year, one for the Republicans and one for the Democrats. And I guess that's how you kind of remain under everybody's good graces.
Yeah, yeah. So the turkeys talked turkey and ate turkey.
Exactly.
Yeah, okay. Well, tasty Thanksgiving and holiday recipes appeared in papers in columns, and I'm sure we would be reading this one if we were back in those days. Household News by Eleanor Hale. And how's this for, I didn't have the whole recipe, but just the title is mouth-watering. Honey, almond, sweet potatoes.
Ooh, that sounds good.
Yeah, yeah. In June 5th, 1941, the Dillon Tribune had an article about the Davis Turkey Ranch of Cut Bank, Montana. It was reported that the ranch had just purchased 4,000 poults. They called them poults, 200 Holland Whites, and 8,800 duck-breasted mammoth bronze turkeys for the nation's Thanksgiving and Christmas tables. The story went on to report that the young Turks were kept in a brooder house for 6 weeks and then turned loose to roam the ranch. And you did in your research, you found a turkey ranch right here in Beaverhead County.
Yeah, Dillon actually had their own turkey farm, and it was owned by the Ladens. Let me see here if I can see where it's at. It was out on Highway 41, and basically is what they would do is they would raise the turkeys, and then couple weeks up to Thanksgiving, they would start butchering them and getting them ready for transport.
Wow. Did it say in there, did they supply just our area or?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep. So basically they had a small little thing where they would, they would just get these turkeys ready. They have a couple pictures of them where they show L.C. Layden displaying the harvest, and they show some of the turkeys that are dead but not plucked yet, and then they show a couple live ones, and they show a 25-pound one on a scale. So.
Wow. Interesting. A turkey farm. Okay. In the Wednesday, November 25th, 1942 edition of the Dillon Examiner, the front page above the fold. Now remember, in newspaper lingo, if your story is above the fold, it's big time.
Yeah.
It featured a Thanksgiving poem by Burris Jenkins Jr., plus a proclamation from Montana Governor Sam C. Ford that Thanksgiving would be observed on Thursday, November 26th. It seems like they had the elected officials kept having to remind us when Thanksgiving was, and I'm not really sure they needed to do that.
No, I don't think they did, but I think it kind of was one of those things where it was tradition. So they'd come out every now and then and just remind people, Thanksgiving's coming up, And honestly, it could have been, too, because there wasn't that full set date. It just seemed to kind of move around a little bit.
Well, and then can you imagine if CNN or Fox News or somebody was there, set up where you see the governor there and he's issuing it, then he's holding it up to the camera and smiling.
They would probably do that almost basically for the paper in those times.
Yeah. The article also announced the annual Union Church. Remember the Union Church,
Yep.
the name of the service. Now this time, Presbyterian, Methodist, and Baptist were the participants of the Union Church services to take place, and they would take place in the Presbyterian Church. Once again, all offerings would be donated to Barrett Hospital. So that's now 10, 11 years now that they've done that.
Yeah.
The St. James Episcopal Church held their own Thanksgiving service, and like their peers, all offerings would be donated to Barrett Hospital. This would be the first wartime Thanksgiving for 3 years. Because remember, we're now in the middle of World War II.
Yeah.
Next to that story was another one reporting that Reverend V. G. Lewis. Once again, initials. We talked about that before. Initials of the St. James Episcopal Church delivered the main talk at the latest meeting of the Dillon Rotary Club. In the November 21st, 1945 Dillon Examiner, the article promoted the annual community union service had a slightly different feel. The opening paragraph read, now remember the date again, November 21st, 1945. The opening paragraph read, Beaverhead County residents will observe the peacetime Thanksgiving since 1941 tomorrow in the traditional manner. Hundreds of homes will be the centers of gaiety and feastings, but there will be moments of solemn thanksgiving that a terrible war is over with. Churches in Dillon and Beaverhead County had special Thanksgiving services from Dillon to Lima to Armstead. There's a town we don't talk about very much. All offered special Thanksgiving services. Businesses and schools were closed until the following Monday. This is the first Thanksgiving for 3 years that we have felt we had a right to be joyous. The actual fighting in both theaters of war has ceased. Many of our men and women have returned home and more are on the way. For these things, we are thankful.
Yep.
So I went, after I did this, I went back and I said, well, I'm going to go look around World War I and see what was happening. But it's virtually the only thing that's really mentioned in regarding Thanksgiving in those years was what we talked about, the little mentions that, Jeremy spent Thanksgiving with that was it. The big news in 1918, the end of the World War I, was the flu epidemic.
Yeah.
And they
Spanish flu.
Yeah, which didn't happen in Spain.
Yeah. Wasn't it brought over from that area?
Yeah, there's several stories. In fact, that might be an interesting one because when you read how Dillon and Beaverhead County handled the flu epidemic, I mean, I lost a great aunt. My grandfather's sister died in that. So, but that's, once again, we're getting a little... You
guys see why we do these so far apart.
Yes, yeah. Well, it's like falling down the history rabbit hole.
It is.
So, then there was an ad. Okay, I got a little sidetracked now. Go back to the Thanksgiving World War II, and then you go fast forward a couple years. An ad in the November 1947 Dillon Tribune, an ad promoting the Pipe Organ Lodge and their Thanksgiving dinner, inviting folks to enjoy a carefree dinner with carefully planned menus prepared to please. No party too large.
Yep.
And I saw a picture, at the truck stop south of town, at the wall as you're walking in, up on the wall, there's a picture of the Pipestone Lodge. And I forgot what a cool place that was.
It was pretty neat. It was something that, you're kind of sad we don't have around anymore.
Well, and I think there's been efforts over the years to try and bring it back, but I don't know if you could bring that exact decor back the way that they had it, because they literally came up with Pipestone out there. As noted in the November 23rd, 1948 Dillon Daily Tribune, and there's another one. It changed. It went from the Dillon Tribune to the Dillon Daily Tribune.
Yep.
5 churches in Dillon, Assembly of God, Baptist, Latter-day Saints, Methodist, and Presbyterian, met at the Baptist Church for a union Thanksgiving service. The First Evangelical Lutheran Church, the St. Rose Catholic Church, and the St. James Episcopal Church also held services, and once again, offerings from all these Thanksgiving services were donated to the Barrett Hospital. In that same edition, there was an announcement for the 4th grade Thanksgiving programs at the Bagley School. The program featured music, poetry, and a play titled A Little Lost Pilgrim. Now, in February, November 21st, in the Dillon Tribune, it was reported that the Knights of Pythas, there's another organization, of Delta Lodge number 15, held their annual Thanksgiving dance at the Lima High School gym on Thanksgiving evening. A turkey will be given for first prize, a ham for second, and a hen for third. So I'm saying hen's a chicken,
Yep.
So no report of what the contest was. Don't know if it was a dance contest, but the last line said that balloons would be released at midnight. You think maybe there was stuff in those balloons?
Maybe that's how they released them, and you popped your balloon, and that's
found something like that.
That was kind of the time too. One thing started really popping up and got kind of popular that I noticed was the good old turkey shoot. Was in the 40s. It seemed like it was kind of popular when I was looking through there. They'd host a turkey shoot so that people could get a turkey for Thanksgiving. Some of these ranches, they'd have rifle ranges out there, gun clubs, and they would go out and they'd say, bullets will fly and heads will fly. Basically, it meant when you hit the target, you got a turkey.
Well, I know when I first moved back to Dillon, I worked for Larry Chaffin at the radio station.
Yeah. One
of our big promotions was the turkey shoot, where you would a caller would call, and then they say, okay, go ahead and
pick a door.
Yeah, pick a door, and if they heard the turkey, they want a turkey.
Yep.
If they heard the gun with no noise or some kind of sound effect or something, they didn't, and it was hugely popular.
Yeah, and I think they were doing it this year too. I think I heard it on the radio.
Well, it's one of those radio promotions that never gets old.
Yeah,
it never gets old because nowadays it's like I'm not a big fan of radio trivia contests because people can just Google the answer.
Yeah, radio trivia is kind of really lost its mystique. Because
the internet has taken it away, but the turkey shoot, on the other hand, there's no you can't guess on the internet. And I know we had and now everything's computerized and stuff, but we had the carts that looked like a slimmed down version of an 8-track tape, and that's what we had. Yeah. And so we had several on there. I'm giving trade secrets away. We had several on there, and we had one cart that had 4 losers and 5 winners, and another one, so on and stuff. So you kind of by being on the air, you could kind of figure out if you used the same cart.
Yeah,
you kind of knew who the next winner was. But then we would mix those up because the listeners were doing the same figuring.
Yeah.
On how's it going to work out. And so when you threw them off by having 2 or 3 winners in a row and then all of a sudden losers, it's, great promotion.
Now they probably just have like a random generator because they tell them to pick a door from what I heard this year. And then, doors 1 through 12 is what I think it was, So, they probably have something that randomly generates the right door.
And did they have the gunfire?
They'd have a gun go off and then you'd hear an elephant or a frog or an owl or a turkey.
Turkey. Well, and we've come to the end of our turkey talk for talking about Thanksgiving, and it's like we've basically figured it out that Thanksgiving really, the celebration of it hasn't really changed that much. It's primarily a family.
Yeah.
It's a family where you get together, friends come to town, you go to a friend's house and whatnot. That hasn't changed in the 100 years we've talked about it. The thing that, and maybe churches had Thanksgiving services, but I'm not so sure they had them on Thanksgiving more than having them the Sunday prior to Thanksgiving.
Yeah. And I think a lot of it too was, you'd see a lot of these dances and stuff, but you got to remember that was in late 1800s where that was probably their big social gathering after they spent months working out in the field. They'd come and have these big social gatherings. So, they didn't have the luxury we do now where you can text somebody or call somebody or video chat with somebody. And I think for the first little bit of the late 1800s, it was a big gathering. And then it kind of went back more to the traditional where it was just more of like a family gathering. And like we said, leading up till about 1950s, you saw where people would literally report to the paper what they did for Thanksgiving, kind of as their way.
I think it went into the 60s too.
Yeah,
it went into the 60s. But there wasn't the same definition of a holiday because right now schools get out Wednesday at noon. In those days, you went to school the whole day.
Yeah.
And there was, the movie theater was open on Thanksgiving. And I'm not sure, maybe the Big Sky
They were open, I think, later in the day for Thanksgiving. I think they might have did one show towards the end of the day.
But for the most part, and the theaters that had the basketball games or the theater that showed the World Series and stuff like that, they didn't. That was their entertainment. And I'm thinking when they were watching the World Series, which was played 2 months prior to that on old, it's a silent movie and stuff like that, but they're still getting to see it.
And it's still very interesting because we all witnessed, Black Friday, which was the day after Thanksgiving. People, they'd go down and camp out on Thanksgiving so that they could get those deals. Well, then the stores started pushing, Thanksgiving evening as a time to be open and to give these sales. And the general public, for the most part, kind of pushed back on it. And now you see most stores that, they're like, we're closed Thanksgiving, look for our Black Friday sales. And they even kind of pushed those farther ahead in the day. Well, instead of really, really early on Friday morning.
One business owner that I talked to said that they were closed on Thanksgiving. There was no thought process. They just decided to do it because they thought it was important that their employees spent the holiday with their family and friends. And that's basically the definition of Thanksgiving. You're supposed to be thankful for what you have.
It's the one day of the year where you take time to, and this is kind of what I saw is they said Thanksgiving had been celebrated, hundreds of years. And basically it was the one time of the year where people took off from the day just to be thankful for all the bounties that they've had.
Well, and I'm going to be real philosophical and just say, it's not a bad mantra to carry with you every day.
Yep.
Every day. Okay. Well, Jeremy, we finally did it. History.
We did.
We're going to be back again in a couple of weeks because we're going to talk about Christmas and how, and that's going to be interesting to see how early days of Dillon and Beaverhead County and maybe we'll spread out. We will truly cover Southwestern Montana. We'll go back into the deep history books and find out maybe what happened at Bannock and maybe some of the older towns, the Coolidges and stuff, and what happened and how they celebrated Christmas and the New Year's. And we thank everyone for joining us. Once again, I'm Wally Felt. This is Jeremy Crawford. Now you know Southwest Montana.